Okay, so welcome back to the channel. But today we're going to do a kind of long video, I believe, because if you kind of look at the hands-on tutorials that we've been kind of going through, we've kind of come up to the compute instances right now. And today we're going to go on to containers, and containers actually, believe it or not, are so popular in the world. Um, a lot of companies use them. If you don't know what actually containers are, just think of them as a small type of virtual machine that uses less resources, less energy, um, to achieve the same results as an normal running VM with an application. Because what you want to do is you want to take your application and minimize it, make it smaller, run it on container, and then this container could basically run on different platforms throughout the world. So you could pick AWS, you could pick Microsoft Azure, you could run it on GCP. They all basically provide a platform for containers to to run your application. So that's the one. That's what we're going to concentrate on today. So just to kind of kick this off, I went in here and I did actually start kind of looking at this, because this is about the Amazon Elastic Container Service. Now, um, ECS, is widely used. So this is going to be a kind of important tutorial to kind of concentrate on. But I did go into this one and I kind of felt that, it didn't really explain an awful lot of what I kind of needed to do. It wasn't um, very kind of clear for any, it does provide some good information, but it wasn't really kind of clear about what you'd actually have to do if you were, starting off as a learner to containers. Now, I've worked a lot with containers previously. I haven't done a huge amount with AWS containers, but a container is a container, so a container can basically run on any platform. Um, but I would kind of read this page. I'd put this into the notes and kind of read it, but I wouldn't kind of concentrate too much on it. So the one that I kind of went over to, I went out and I kind of looked, um, at how we could kind of do this for first time. So just in case you're new to ECS, cluster, this from Medium, basically Justin Burnett provides a great document here from June 2024, from June 24th from 2023, and it kind of explains an awful lot more about what the actual container is and registries and all of that type of stuff. So I think that's a kind of better tutorial for us to get into, because really what we're trying to do here again is make sure that we have um, a hands-on tutorial for this Elastic um, container service, because this is going to probably be one of the exam questions at least. It'll probably always be something on containers because they're actually so kind of popular. So it is an important one. What we'll do now is we'll kind of go through this one for the first time. But in kind of preparation for this, when you kind of go back to the Amazon version of this, what it basically talks about here is actually how to install that you should install Docker. So the first thing that I basically did was I went out, I was in this tutorial here and I went out and it kind of talks about installing Docker. So again, I'm on a Mac. You can also do it for Windows here. But basically Docker is, you can think of it as the kind of image builder, because you need to run an image on a container, and to run an image on a container you have to have an image first. So the image could be small, could be large. I've worked with kind of really big images in my own job. So you know the first thing you'd actually have to do is actually install Docker. So the first thing I did was I went over to this URL to install Docker. I pulled down Docker for Mac because I'm on Mac. There's plenty of tutorials on how to actually kind of install this, but basically one thing that I kind of did was, once I basically had pulled down the Docker installer from Mac, I just basically double clicked in it and I went to the Docker login page. So you're kind of prompted to kind of log in and set up a username and password. So I did that. I used Cloud Solution Architects as a username. So I did that. I set up a password for it. Then basically the Docker desktop basically gets installed. And what the Docker desktop looks like once you've actually installed it is, it looks like this. So this is Docker desktop, And this is basically just as in it says a Docker desktop because it's very easy. It's a UI that you can basically have a look at all your containers and everything. And there's a great little video here about what is a container and how to run a container, like 5 minutes, 6 minutes. These are only kind of small, but they kind of give you good information about starting off in containers if you've never actually used them or run them before. So that was the first thing that I kind of did. I installed Docker Desktop. As part of Docker Desktop, what happens is you actually get a CLI. So if I if I just kind of do Docker here, you can sort of see that you get this, command line prompt. So I just kind of did Docker here. You get this kind of command line prompt, which basically sort of says, it's a self-sufficient runtime for containers, and it has all of these options. It has all these options here for TLS and debug and configs and everything, versions. Here's some of the commands that basically this tutorial uses. So like builder, like to manage builds and everything. So there's build X. So there's plenty of kind of work that actually has to be done. Docker itself is actually a really, really big. It's a really, really big, let me say, technology as part of the world. So Docker itself is so critical that you would actually learn. It really is. It's going to be one of those technologies that you should know Docker. You should know containers. Whatever kind of platform it basically runs on, you should know that. But this is just like an introduction to kind of the Docker build. Like I sort of say, having information and having knowledge about Docker Desktop and Docker how it runs kind of through the command line, which is here, it's kind of vital to any company because a lot of companies do use Docker. So if you don't know, Docker Desktop, please take some time, study about Docker Desktop, study about Docker, create some images, create some builds, push it to the registry, because what actually happens is when you actually have your image built, you basically use Docker to build your image, and your image is built. You basically push that over to a repository, and the repository has to sit somewhere. So it can sit in AWS, it can sit in Azure, it can sit on your own prem, like on-prem resource. It can actually sort of sit anywhere. But basically, that was the kind of prerequisites that I kind of did for starting this off, because I wanted to kind of show you what I kind of did, and I obviously, when I went to kind of install Docker, I got the normal email that basically says, please verify your email. But the installation for Docker Desktop was very simple. Docker is worldwide used. There's another one also called Podman. Now, I don't have Podman, so how you would say Podman, if I kind of clear this here, if you kind of just did Podman, I actually have like Podman kind of, installed as well, because I was actually using it for a different project. But normally you kind of wouldn't have Podman, but there is kind of Podman as well that's actually available. So you can use, kind of, and you can sort of see it's the same type of thing where you kind of can build and you can kind of create, and you can do all these kind of checking the images and checking the names and run the image container from there and all this kind of stuff. But what would actually happen is, what I've kind of found of obviously is, you basically have Docker versus Podman. So they're the kind of two most popular probably in the world. I know both of these just because, sometimes a company will basically ask you to kind of, use Podman, another company will ask you to use Docker. But the idea is the same, and all you're trying to do at the end of the day is basically make sure that, you get a container that's built using Docker or Podman. You run that container locally. So you sort of see here, it's kind of showing you how to kind of run the container locally. You test it from there. So you can actually test it from there. And at that point, then basically, you can push it up to the registry, and then you can pull it down from the registry, and you can run it on, something like Amazon Container Services. But all of these kind of little images that you're basically creating here, like we sort of said, um, they're available for testing first inside of Docker. So before you even kind of push this up to registry, you know, for use somewhere else, you can actually test it in Docker. You can test it in Podman. You can kind of run it locally on like a little um, IP and port that you kind of specify, and it just makes it kind of really easy. But again, what we're going to just kind of do is we're just going to kind of follow through on this kind of EC ECS cluster setting up for the first time um, by Justin Burnett, and just kind of go through this and sort of see, what we actually need to kind of do, because this is I felt a kind of much more better introduction to containers, and about your kind of images and all this kind of sort of stuff, that, and you can sort of see here you're basically starting to use kind of a few little Docker commands to basically to build your image. So in the next video, I'm going to keep this one kind of short. It's kind of just like a kind of introduction, and then we're going to kind of start to build out this setting up an ECS cluster for the first time.